2 women at the pool pulled me in and whispered, "No one's coming to save you," and suddenly, I wasn't sure if I wanted to be saved. The sun had just reached that perfect height where it glinted off the surface of the pool, turning every ripple into a scatter of light that danced across the tiled edges. I had come seeking quiet, a rare pocket of solitude in a life that seemed always rushed, always loud. The pool was almost empty, except for 2 women lounging near the far end, the kind of presence that makes the world feel slightly smaller and simultaneously more expansive. They moved with effortless grace, laughter spilling softly like a melody I couldn't place. One leaned back on her elbows, letting the sun kiss her shoulders, while the other adjusted her sunglasses, tilting her head slightly as if she were noticing everything around her without needing to. There was something quietly magnetic about them, a warmth that drew me closer even before I realized I was observing too intently. I dipped my toes in first, the water cool against my skin, sending a shiver up my spine that was both refreshing and unsettling. The women glanced at me, smiles that were easy but held a hint of knowing, like they could see right through my careful composure. I tried to look casual, but the way their eyes lingered made it impossible to feel invisible. My chest tightened, not from anxiety alone, but from the subtle pull of curiosity, that strange tension that arises when someone appears in your life and immediately feels significant. The air smelled faintly of sunscreen and chlorine, mingling with the warmth of the late morning sun. Every sound seemed amplified, the soft slap of water against the tiles, the distant hum of traffic, their low voices carrying over the water. I noticed the little details. One's fingers brushing through her wet hair, the other's legs crossed deliberately, toes just skimming the surface. Small, elegant movements, yet they seemed to ripple through the quiet, pulling me in without a word. I found myself inching closer, not sure whether it was curiosity or something more primal, a desire to be part of their calm, confident world. I could feel the subtle difference in energy between the 2 women. One exuded a playful confidence, eyes sparkling like she knew a secret, while the other carried a quiet steadiness, as though she had seen enough of life to be unshakable yet still open to connection. I realized that just being near them made the air feel heavier and lighter at the same time, my heart caught in that odd tug of anticipation and hesitation. As I settled on a lounge chair nearby, I noticed the way their glances met mine briefly, holding just long enough to make me wonder if I should speak, or if they would speak first. That unspoken invitation, subtle and unhurried, was intoxicating. Every detail seemed magnified, the warm curve of their smiles, the subtle tilt of a head, the gentle rhythm of their conversation carried on the breeze. It was one of those rare moments where the world outside the pool ceased to exist, leaving only the glittering water, the sunlight, and 2 women who somehow made the air around them feel alive. I knew then that this was not going to be an ordinary encounter. Something had shifted, though I couldn't yet name it, a quiet tension, a spark of curiosity, and something more profound, as though the universe had carved out this little sunlit corner just for us, and I had stumbled into it unaware. And in that instant, I felt the first stirrings of an irresistible pull, the kind that promises change, danger, and something I might not be ready for. The first ripple of movement came unexpectedly. One of the women leaned forward, eyes glinting with mischief, and splashed a gentle arc of water in my direction. It was playful, almost teasing, yet there was a deliberate ease in the gesture, like she knew exactly how it would unsettle me, just enough to make me laugh, just enough to make my pulse quicken. I tried to splash back, but my movements were clumsy, betraying the strange nervous thrill that had begun to coil in my chest. Before I could regain composure, the second woman leaned over and reached for my arm with a soft, confident grip. "Come closer," she said, her voice low and melodic, carrying warmth and a subtle undertone of challenge. Her hand lingered longer than necessary, brushing lightly against my skin. It wasn't accidental. The brief contact sent an almost electric jolt up my arm, a reminder that I was not just being pulled physically into the water, but emotionally as well. The first woman took my hand next, guiding me gently toward the deeper end of the pool. The water lapped against our bodies, cool and buoyant, and every movement made me acutely aware of proximity. The way their fingers grazed mine, the faint press of their shoulders brushing against mine as we adjusted to the current. I could feel the gentle sway of their bodies alongside mine, each step choreographed by instinct rather than thought, creating a rhythm that was both intimate and exhilarating. Their laughter echoed over the water, light and melodic, and for a moment, I forgot everything else, the world outside the pool, the routines I had been clinging to, even my own hesitation. The teasing energy between them was intoxicating, as if I had wandered into a private space where time slowed just enough for subtle things to matter. The way a hand lingered on a forearm, the tilt of a head as they watched me try to regain balance, the warmth of sun on wet skin that made the air feel thick with possibility. It was playful, yes, but it carried an unspoken challenge. I sensed their awareness of me, of how small gestures could unbalance me, how a smile or a touch could tug at something deeper than curiosity. I tried to focus on the water, on the cool rush against my chest, but I couldn't ignore the quiet tension building with each glance, each laugh, each brush of skin. For the first time that morning, I felt the strange duality of fear and desire, the uncertainty of not knowing what would happen next, paired with the thrill of surrendering control, even just a little. Their presence was magnetic, drawing me in like the gentle pull of the current, and every playful splash or teasing tug became an unspoken conversation, a way of saying, "Stay, and see what happens." By the time I found myself fully immersed, both literally and emotionally, I realized I had crossed a line without realizing it. I was no longer an observer. I was a participant in this dance, this delicate interplay of laughter, water, and proximity, where every brush of a hand or splash of water held the promise of something more. And though a part of me hesitated, another part of me wanted nothing more than to follow, to let them lead, and to feel what it meant to be pulled entirely into their world. The water had settled into a calm rhythm around us, small ripples reflecting the sunlight like tiny shards of glass. I was still catching my breath from their playful pulls and splashes, but now something had shifted, an almost imperceptible change in the air, as if the playful teasing had been a prelude to something far more intimate. They drew closer, leaning in so that our shoulders touched lightly, and their eyes held a spark that made my chest tighten. Then she said it, the line that would echo in my mind far longer than the playful chaos of the pool. "No one's coming to save you." Her voice was soft, but there was an edge to it, a teasing warning that made my stomach flip. It wasn't threatening, exactly. It was an invitation wrapped in challenge. The other woman mirrored the expression, eyes warm yet knowing, fingers lightly grazing the small of my back as if to reinforce the unspoken message. I froze for a moment, feeling the weight of their presence more than the cool water around us. The brush of her hand was electric, so subtle yet it spoke volumes. My pulse quickened, not out of fear, but from the intensity of the attention, the intimacy of proximity I wasn't accustomed to. Their confidence was magnetic, the kind that makes you question your own hesitation, while simultaneously craving the safety and warmth it offered. It wasn't just the touch, it was the quiet way they watched me, the slight tilt of a head, the faint curve of a smile that suggested they knew exactly how far to push, exactly when to hold back. Every laugh, every glance, every ripple of water between us carried meaning, layering tension over the playful undercurrent we had established before. I felt unsteady in the most unusual way, as if gravity itself had shifted, pulling me closer into their orbit. The scent of sunscreen, mingled with chlorine and something uniquely theirs, something floral, warm, familiar, made the moment feel both immediate and suspended. I noticed the way the sunlight glinted off strands of their damp hair, the way the water outlined the curve of their shoulders, the subtle warmth of their skin brushing against mine. I realized that this was more than a playful pool game, it was a careful, deliberate weaving of closeness and curiosity, of testing boundaries while nurturing trust. I wanted to speak, to respond, to break the spell, but the words caught in my throat. Their presence had created a new kind of stillness, one that made every heartbeat loud, every breath heavy, every brush of skin a signal. And in that quiet, my mind began to understand the paradox. I was both vulnerable and safe, uncertain and inexplicably drawn in, caught in a tension that made the world outside the pool fade into insignificance. Then the first woman leaned slightly closer, hand resting near mine on the pool edge, eyes glinting with mischief and something deeper, an unspoken promise. "You don't have to fight it," she murmured, voice low enough that only I could hear. The other woman mirrored her proximity, shoulder brushing against mine, gaze softening but intense, and in that instant I realized I had willingly stepped into something I couldn't predict, but didn't want to. The warning had been given, yes, but the allure was stronger. And in that suspended moment, I felt the first real stirrings of trust, desire, and a magnetic pull that would define the hours to come. After the initial thrill of playful splashes and teasing words, the pool seemed to settle into a quiet rhythm, a space where laughter softened and conversations deepened. The women guided me toward a floating mat near the center, letting the current carry us gently. The water lapped around our bodies, cool against sun-warmed skin, creating a strange blend of comfort and alertness, as if the world outside the pool no longer mattered. They began to talk, first about trivial things, the softness of the day, the warmth of the sun on water, subtle observations about the way light caught the ripples, but gradually, the conversation shifted. One of them asked about my life, my dreams, the small disappointments that rarely get shared. Her voice was gentle, patient, but it carried an undercurrent of curiosity that made it impossible to lie, impossible to hide the corners of myself I usually kept tucked away. I found myself speaking, hesitantly at first, about work, routines, fleeting regrets. I noticed how they listened, truly listened, eyes holding mine, smiles neither condescending nor distracted. Every so often, one of their hands would brush mine as I gestured, a touch so light it could have been accidental, or maybe it wasn't. The other's shoulder occasionally pressed against mine as we floated, a grounding presence that made the vulnerability I felt less frightening, less exposed. The sensation of water moving against our bodies amplified every small motion. When their fingertips lingered, tracing the edge of a floating mat or nudging a loose strand of hair behind an ear, I became acutely aware of proximity in a way that made my heart beat a little faster. There was warmth in these touches, not overtly romantic, but tender, affirming, almost protective. I realized that trust was being built not with words alone, but with subtle gestures, with shared stillness, with the way they made space for me to exist fully without judgment. We spoke about fears next, softer ones, the ones you rarely admit even to yourself. I admitted moments of loneliness, of feeling adrift. One of the women rested her hand lightly on my forearm, and for a moment, the rhythm of her pulse seemed to echo my own. The other's hand found my shoulder briefly, a grounding anchor in the water, reassuring without needing to say anything. There was no rush, no pressure, only quiet acknowledgement and acceptance. Time seemed to stretch in that suspended moment. The sun reflected off the water, scattering gold across their faces, highlighting the subtle grace in their movements, the warmth in their expressions. I realized that the initial thrill, the teasing, the playful pulls, had been a bridge to this intimacy. I felt seen in a way that was almost startling, a strange mixture of comfort and vulnerability, a sense that connection could exist without need or expectation. By the time we drifted toward the shallow end, I was no longer hesitant. I felt part of something larger than the pool, something quiet and human. Their presence was both exhilarating and grounding, a paradox that left me disarmed but eager to stay within their orbit. In that gentle, sunlit water, I discovered that trust wasn't demanded, it was earned slowly, with patience, laughter, and the quiet intimacy of shared moments. By now, the initial thrill and laughter of the pool had softened into something more charged, quieter yet unmistakably present. Floating side by side on the gentle current, I felt a new awareness of the space between us, how their shoulders brushed mine with calculated ease, how the occasional accidental touch lingered just long enough to send a ripple through my chest. Every glance, every shift of weight seemed deliberate yet effortless, like a language I was only beginning to understand. One of the women rested her hand briefly on my chest to steady me as the water swayed us. It was light, almost casual, but the warmth of her palm pressed through the fabric of my swim shirt, and I became conscious of the subtle tremor in my own hand. The other nudged my shoulder lightly, a playful spark that belied a deeper awareness. I caught their eyes meeting mine, flickers of smiles that lingered too long to be mere friendliness. The tension was subtle, a quiet hum beneath the surface, yet it felt electric, intimate, and somehow both safe and forbidden. The air was thick with summer warmth, and the faint scent of sunscreen mingled with water, but it was the closeness of their bodies, the rhythm of their movements, that captured my attention. I noticed the way their hair clung to their necks, damp from the pool, and how the sunlight caught the curves of their shoulders and the gentle swell of muscles under the water. The smallest gestures, tilts of the head, the way a hand lingered near mine on the floating mat, the soft brush of an elbow, were laden with meaning. I tried to speak, to comment on the sunlight or the quiet of the afternoon, but my voice caught in my throat. Every word seemed trivial compared to the intensity of proximity, the unspoken pull that made me aware of my own heartbeat in ways I hadn't felt in years. I felt the tension between us in a physical sense too, the weight of shared space, the warmth of skin near mine, the buoyancy of bodies moving together in water. Each subtle touch felt deliberate yet entirely natural, a language of closeness without words. There was something almost mesmerizing in the way they watched me. Their smiles were patient but loaded with implication, like they understood both my hesitation and my curiosity. I could feel desire in the space between us, not urgent or overwhelming, but a quiet, simmering awareness that made every glance and every touch resonate more deeply. My mind wrestled with hesitation, but my body betrayed my interest, leaning ever so slightly toward them when no one was looking. As the afternoon stretched on, the playful teasing of earlier gave way to a more nuanced connection, a delicate dance of touches and glances that communicated trust, desire, and subtle intimacy all at once. The romantic tension was no longer confined to moments of laughter or splash. It existed in the quiet pauses, the way water shimmered across our skin, the way fingers brushed as we shifted positions, and the lingering warmth when their hands rested near mine. In that gentle, sunlit space, I realized that the pull between us had become undeniable. It wasn't overwhelming or rushed, it was deliberate, slow, and consuming in a way that left me both breathless and grounded. The quiet tension hummed through every moment, promising that what had started as playful curiosity was evolving into something far deeper, something I couldn't yet define but couldn't resist. The afternoon had slipped by unnoticed, the playful energy of earlier softening into a quieter, more intimate rhythm. Floating near the shallow end, the three of us drifted in silence for a moment, the sunlight bouncing off the water in gentle patterns across our faces. It was in that stillness that something shifted, a quiet opening, subtle but profound. One of the women leaned closer, her hand brushing lightly against my forearm, a gesture that was tender and grounding at the same time. I felt the weight of her gaze and the other's warm presence at my side. For the first time in hours, or maybe years, I felt a strange courage, a willingness to let my guard down. My voice, hesitant at first, began to speak truths I rarely shared aloud. I talked about the quiet loneliness that had followed me through routine days, the self-doubt that clung to me even when life seemed fine on the surface. The words were awkward at times, my throat tight, yet the pull and their proximity seemed to soften the edges of my vulnerability. As I spoke, their reactions were gentle but deliberate. One rested her hand on my shoulder, the warmth pressing through the water and reassuring me that I was safe. The other lightly placed her palm on my upper arm, the gesture so subtle it could have been accidental, yet the timing and the way she held it spoke volumes. The small touches anchored me, a silent acknowledgement that my feelings were seen, accepted, and valued. Their eyes were patient and steady, not probing or judgmental, but attentive in a way that made me feel truly understood. Every tilt of the head, every soft smile, every lingering glance reinforced the unspoken message: you don't have to hide here, you can let yourself be fully present. The water moved around us, cool against our warm skin, heightening the awareness of proximity, the gentle press of arms, the occasional brush of fingertips, the warmth radiating from their bodies as we floated together. I felt something shift inside me. The playful teasing and subtle tension of earlier had transformed into a profound connection, an intimacy rooted not in spectacle or urgency, but in quiet trust and shared vulnerability. Their presence was both soothing and exhilarating, a paradox that made my chest tighten with a mix of comfort and longing. I realized I was letting go of my hesitation, allowing myself to feel seen and cared for in a way that transcended the playful flirtation of the earlier moments. For a long stretch, none of us spoke. Instead, the connection lived in subtle touches and shared glances, in the quiet rhythm of synchronized movements in the water. One of them reached out and gently straightened a stray strand of hair sticking to my forehead, another leaned close to share a soft laugh at something trivial I had said. Each gesture, though small, carried an emotional weight, weaving a sense of closeness and mutual care that was almost palpable. By the time we finally settled near the pool's edge, I felt transformed, not in dramatic or obvious ways, but in a quiet, human way. Trust had been built, walls had begun to fall, and an intimacy had blossomed that made the sunlight feel warmer, the water feel softer, and the world feel just a little more alive. The subtle romantic tension remained, but it had matured, grounded in the deep emotional connection we had nurtured, promising a closeness that was both comforting and thrilling. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting a soft, golden glow over the pool, and the water reflected the shifting light like molten glass. We had moved to the pool's edge, sitting with our feet dangling in the cool water. The playful teasing and quiet tension of earlier had softened into a serene, lingering intimacy. Each movement felt natural, unhurried, a conversation without words, communicated through the gentle rhythm of proximity and the subtle language of touch. One of the women leaned her shoulder lightly against mine, the warmth of her body radiating across the small space between us. The other rested her hand near mine, fingertips brushing against the edge of the pool. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let myself feel the quiet steadiness of their presence, the gentle weight of their attention, and the comfort of simply being there, seen, accepted, and included. There was no need for grand declarations. The intimacy was in the details, in the small gestures that carried volumes of unspoken understanding. We shared soft conversation, laughter occasionally bubbling up in the gentle quiet of the afternoon. One recounted a memory from years ago, a subtle vulnerability in her tone, and the other nodded with quiet empathy, squeezing my arm lightly in a gesture that felt protective and inclusive. I realized then that this was not just about romantic attraction. It was about connection, the slow, careful weaving of trust, affection, and mutual respect that made even the simplest moments feel profound. The water lapped gently against our legs, creating a soothing backdrop to the warmth that radiated from their proximity. Every small gesture, a hand resting briefly on an arm, a shoulder brushing against mine, the shared laughter and knowing glances, felt like a thread pulling us closer together, forming a tapestry of intimacy that was both tender and emotionally rich. I became aware of the subtle ways they had guided me through the afternoon, the playful pull into the pool, the teasing glances, the light touches that gradually led to this shared comfort. In that quiet, sunlit space, I felt a sense of belonging I hadn't realized I was missing. The earlier tension, the teasing, the subtle thrill, the whispered challenge of, "No one's coming to save you," had evolved into a deep, steady warmth. Desire lingered, yes, but it was gentle and patient, interwoven with trust, laughter, and the ease of human connection. I felt alive in a new way, aware of both the beauty of their presence and the emotional resonance of the moments we shared. As the sun continued to lower, casting long reflections across the water, we leaned into each other naturally, shoulders and arms pressing lightly together. One of the women nudged my shoulder playfully, a small gesture that made me laugh, and the other's hand brushed mine again, lingering just enough to remind me of the subtle connection we had nurtured all afternoon. The intimacy was calm, secure, and affirming, a promise of closeness without need or expectation. Finally, as we gathered our things and prepared to leave, I felt the lingering warmth of their touch, the echo of quiet laughter, and the satisfaction of having shared something rare, a slow, deliberate, human connection that had grown from curiosity to trust to something quietly romantic. No grand gestures were necessary. The afternoon had spoken for itself. The pool, the sun, the gentle touches, and the laughter had created a world where closeness was both safe and exhilarating, and I knew that the memory of this day would linger, tender and vivid, in my mind for years to come.